Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Michelle Ihmels, and I am the director of our Caregiver Live Well program here at Intermountain. And today we have Allie Spencer, and she is going to be presenting on eating fresh foods on a budget. And I'm so excited to hear what she has to share with us. Allie is a registered dietitian and a certified specialist in obesity and weight management who works in employee education at Intermountain Healthcare. Allie has over a decade of experience working with patients to improve their nutrition and lifestyle choices. She emphasizes the impact of small changes and concentrates on what is attainable now. In her current position, Allie's focus is ensuring Intermountain dietitians have the tools, training, and resources they need to provide the highest level of care to patients. So with that, Allie, I will turn it over to you. And as we're going through, if you have any questions or comments that you would like to make, please feel free to type those in the chat, and I will be moderating the chat and asking those questions or sharing your comments with Allie as we go.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction, Dr. Ihmels. I am so excited to be here and be with all of you to talk about this topic. And it was really fun to prepare this and do a deep dive. So when we're thinking about eating fresh foods on a budget, I wanted to pose this question first and foremost. Is eating fresh, healthy food really more expensive? Because we hear that all the time, and maybe we've seen that. And when we think about this, is when we look at fresh foods and we compare them to processed foods, there's a lot of things that go into cost. So when we look at highly processed foods, most of the time, those foods are made with inexpensive ingredients. There's a lot of subsidies on some of those products that go into there, whether it's corn or soy or wheat, into those processed foods. And because they're so highly processed, there's a lot of that mechanical production. So it's really easy to have a machine create this food, right, or to mechanize it. Whereas when we're looking at fresh and minimally processed food, there's a lot more added costs. And one of those things, we look at production and storage costs. So to harvest fruits and vegetables, to prepare a salad, it takes a lot more. It's a much more manual process. And one of the most expensive costs in really in any organization is labor. And so the more labor it takes to harvest, to store, to prepare, all of that plays into it. And then also there's been some studies that show that we, as a public, we have the perception that if something is fresh or healthy, it's going to cost more. And so we automatically assume that something that is more expensive is better for us. And so whether or not these foods are healthier, we have this perception that they are. What is interesting, though, is that there was a study done, and what they found is that on average, it was about $1.50 more a day to eat fresh, healthy foods as compared to highly processed food. And I think before we can all sit here and say, okay, I have been out to eat, and ordering a salad is way more than $1.50 more than getting a cheeseburger and fries. And so this is something just to keep in mind, that this is an average and it doesn't play into every possible scenario. But when they calculated it out, that's the average cost. And $1.50 more a day, while it may not seem like a lot, really can add up over the span of a year or a lifetime. And that can seem unattainable for some people. So as I'm going through this presentation, I really want to talk about ways that we can minimize those added costs, but also being aware that even though eating fresh food is an added cost, the benefits of eating foods that are healthier and better for you greatly outweigh that cost. So I don't want to spend a lot of time going over this, but I just wanted to show you how some of the ways this cost can be determined. And what I really want to point out is the bar graph on the far right, that cost per average portion. Because we can look and say, okay, cost per calories or cost per edible gram, but the real nuts and bolts, what we want to get to is how much does this cost to eat, right? By serving what I'm going to get. And so what I wanted to point out is our purple line. So the purple line is protein. And protein is going to include meat and seafood and poultry, as well as eggs and beans and nuts and seeds, right? But you can see fairly consistently across all the bars, that's one of our most expensive costs, okay? And then you can see also we have our red and our green bars, which are fruits and vegetables, and those tend to cost more as well. And then that moderation foods is a catch-all. And so that's one's a little bit misleading, but for the indication of this study, those moderation foods were highly processed foods, so things like donuts or soda, things that are really high in saturated fat and didn't fit really neatly into any one food category. So, you know, why am I starting my presentation and why am I talking about this? And just furthermore, I want to acknowledge that fresher, healthy eating can be more expensive. But if there's anything that I want you to take away from this presentation, it's this one thing. What is the top thing that you can do to save money? Waste less food. And I first want to say I'm not suggesting that anybody is wasting food deliberately, nor am I suggesting that you should eat past the point of fullness or eat when you're not hungry, but food waste is a huge contributor to the money that we lose, okay? And so there was a study done recently, and that they found is people wasted more than 25% of the food that they ate, whether they were eating out or they were at home. And that is equal to about $3.50 a day, or over $1,300 a year, which I think it's really easy for us when we're at the grocery store to see those bills, or when we buy food, to look at it and say, oh my gosh, this is really expensive, but we don't always see the dollar bills going in the trash can when we get rid of food that we're not using. And so when we think about this $3.50 a day, even if we could decrease that by $1.50, that can offset the cost of increasing our intake of fresh, healthy foods. So I wanted to pull this slide up again, just to point something out. So in that research study, what they found were the top 2 contributors to food waste were meat and seafood and fruits and vegetables. So you can look at that and say, okay, those are not only some of the most expensive food that we waste, but they're the ones we waste the most often. And so I'm really going to focus this presentation in thinking about, okay, how do we not only be smart about what we're buying and purchasing, but also how do we work on reducing the waste of those high ticket items that are wasted most frequently? When I'm breaking this down and I'm thinking about affordable fresh eating, I want to think about categorizing it into 3 areas. We have our planning, our shopping, and then cooking and storage. And that's how I'm going to outline and work through my presentation today. So planning is really your first step. And big surprise here, but we need to plan to eat at home more. Eating out is one of the greatest expenses because, as I was talking about before, labor costs is really expensive. And so especially if you're trying to purchase fresh foods from, when you go out to eat, those are going to cost more money. You're going to pay a premium, which doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but eating at home is definitely a way that you can get that more affordable fresh eating. So not only do you save money, but it's also more nutritious. So even when we do go out to eat and we choose something that is fresh, a lot of times there are still things about that are not as healthy as if we were to prepare at home. There's typically a lot more added fat and sodium, even for those foods that are prepared, that appear fresh. The next thing I want to talk to you about is meal planning. So if we're trying to eat at home more to save money, meal planning has got to be something that we start to do. And meal planning can feel really overwhelming. And this is something that when I was working with clients that we would talk about is, oh my gosh, do I have to create something for the whole month, or what do I do? And really my first thing is keep it simple. You don't have to have gourmet meals. Stick to what you're familiar with, right? What do you feel comfortable making? What do people in your family like? And find a system that works for you. The next thing I want to look at is balancing your meals. And I'm in the mood for threes today, right? We talked about 3 ways to budget and save money, but also when it comes to balancing your meals, think about having 3 categories at each meal. We want protein, because we want protein to help us feel satisfied and keep that food with us for a long time. We want carbohydrates. We need that energy, and we want carbohydrates to help fuel our muscles. And then we want color. And think of color as fruits and vegetables, right? And if we can have those 3 components at every meal, that's going to help us provide a balanced breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And so think about that when you're planning your meals. And it can be really simple when you're adding and creating those items. The next is build around affordable ingredients. So if you remember, one of the most expensive things that we are buying and not always using is our protein and then our produce. And so one of the highest protein costs is meat. So whether that's beef or poultry or seafood, those are most expensive. So when you're thinking about how do I get fresh, nutritious foods on a budget, think about how do I incorporate more economical protein options. So maybe you're using more eggs or beans and lentils, trying out tofu. When we start looking at produce, there's a lot of really affordable fruits and vegetables, things like bananas, apples, oranges, cabbage, sweet potatoes, dark green leafy vegetables, green peppers, and carrots. And so when we start building around these more affordable options, it's a lot more attainable to get that fresh eating at a lower price point. The next thing when it comes to meal planning is use what you have. A lot of times we overlook what we already have, and especially I think a pitfall for meal planning is we can get really excited because we see these recipes that look really great, or we want to try something out, and that's not a bad thing, but a great place to start and save money is to look in your pantry or look in your refrigerator and say, okay, or freezer even, especially if you have that deep freezer in the garage. What do I already have that I can build off of? And then think about sharing ingredients across meals. And I think this is a really big one when it comes to these highly perishable food items, especially fruits and vegetables, is what can you do to spread that out? So maybe are there ways that you can rethink produce? For example, could you have roasted carrots one night and then shred carrots and add them to a salad or a grain bowl on another night? So there's different ways that you can use that same ingredient, but have it in different ways. And that really helps with making sure that you use up what you buy. And then lastly, when you're thinking of meal planning, is look at grocery store ads or coupons for not aspiration, but inspiration. We aspire to save money, but so looking at those for inspiration. And I'm going to talk more about coupons in a bit, but having those grocery ads is a great way to see what's on sale this week, and that can really help you save money in the long run. So I do want to touch briefly on the different types, like 2 different types of meal planning methods. So we have what's called the ingredient method, where you shop for ingredients. You buy ingredients, and then from what you have, you build meals. And that works really great for experienced cooks and people that are creative and can say, oh, I can do this and I can do that, I can do that. But it offers the greatest flexibility. One of the things that can be a pitfall to this is if we don't have that really structured plan, then we may overbuy. And it's like, oh my gosh, I bought all these beets, but I didn't end up using them because I used everything else. So the meal method is when you build your meals first, so you plan out your meals and then you shop for ingredients. And this can be a great way to explore new food options. And I also would say this is great for budgeting. And it doesn't mean it has to be that you're looking up specific recipes, and so you found this great recipe on the New York Times Cooking and you want to do it, that's great to do, but this also could just say, hey, I want to build, the basic framework of something. So there's a way to blend the ingredient method and the meal method together. But just know that, again, find something that works for you. If you're first starting off to meal planning, I would definitely recommend starting off with this meal method first as a way, and then building from there. Okay, so when we're thinking, as we're thinking about this, and we're saying, okay, this is great, Allie, I can start to cook at home more, and I can start to meal plan, but I wanted to pull up this and just talk a little bit about stocking your pantry, because if we're going to cook at home more, we need to have things available. And this is an extensive list, and I'm not going to go through line by line, but I do want to highlight some of these different items. And if you know me, which or have worked with me in the past, you will know I am a bean enthusiast. If there's anything I'm trying to get people to eat more, and I'm trying to eat more as a person, it's beans and legumes and lentils. And the reason I was promoting these so strongly is these are so affordable and they are packed with nutrients. They're a great source of protein and fiber and potassium. And so there's a lot of benefits in terms of heart health, in terms of digestive health, and they're so affordable. And so these are a great thing, whether you have dried's the most economical, but it does take longer to prepare. So having canned beans is still a great way to go. Make sure you get the low sodium or no salt added, but that's a great addition to a lot of your meals to incorporate with other fresh ingredients. I also want to point out, looking at vegetables, is canned and jarred vegetables are still a good option. And I know you're probably sitting here and saying, hey, you said we're talking about fresh foods. These are not fresh foods, they're canned. And something to remember about canned or jarred foods is they are packed at the peak of freshness. They do lose some of their nutrients through processing, right, through heat and then through leaching into the liquid that they're canned in, but they're still packed full of nutrients. And canned food lasts almost forever, as long as it's not dented or rusted or bulging. And so it's a great thing, again, just to have on hand that you can help extend some of those fresh ingredients and have a fallback on to make some really delicious food at home. And then one other thing that's maybe a little bit out of the box just to think about is because, one of our biggest expenses, right, that not only costs a lot of money, but then we also don't always use is meat and seafood. And I just want to call out that cans or pouches of things like tuna or salmon, sardines, anchovies can be a great way to get some of that seafood and get those omega-3 rich fish into your diet without really breaking the bank. They do have a lot more sodium in them because they're packaged this way. And so it's not something that you necessarily want to do all the time, but just keeping that as an option and having it as a fallback is a great way to go. And I will say that recently I made a walnut anchovy pasta with whole wheat noodles. And this was the first time I had anchovies outside of salad dressing. And I was blown away. It was really great. So don't be afraid to get creative. I wanted to show you some tools for menu planning. So we have, there's paper menus and I wanted to call out this SpendSmart. It's an Iowa State extension, and they have an entire website that goes into how to budget and how to meal plan, where they have different examples. And so it's a really great resource to go and use to start on this journey. And then I just wanted to highlight some of these apps. But again, whatever works for you is the best way to go. All right, so we've done our base work, we're planning our meals, now we're ready to go to the store. And before we go to the store, we're gonna make a grocery list. This is crucial to sticking on your budget at the store, okay? I have some examples up here of different types of grocery lists. Some are They're categorized, some are by calendar, some are checklists, but whatever you do is find a way to organize your grocery list. Usually a category works best so that you're not zigzagging throughout the grocery store. Nothing's more frustrating. So make sure that you have that list ahead of time so you can be in and out and on with your life. And it's a good way to also do that double check. Okay, this is what I'm building. What foods do I already have in stock? And what do I need to go and buy? At the store. So when we're thinking about saving money and eating fresh food, when we're going to the store or planning our trip to the store, this is a big one. So the first is think about planning your trip. So we talked about that before, right? Of saying, okay, based off of grocery store ads that you get or mailers, you can plan where there's specials or deals. But maybe there's discount programs. Some places have different specials or promotions for seniors or for Utah locals. And so think about that. And then also think about the types of things that you're buying. So sometimes maybe you need to get specialty food items, so like rice noodles, for example. So maybe you're going to an Asian market to try that and find that food, right? Because you can get some better prices and more unique choices there as opposed to your typical grocery store. Also, you may look at fresh produce. So you may go to different stores and say, okay, I'm going to go here for this, I'm going to go here for that. And I don't want to say that that's something you have to do no matter what, because you've got to balance your time as well, right? Doesn't mean you don't have to go to every single store, so plan your trip. Number one thing at the store, don't shop hungry. If you go too hungry, you're going to buy way more than you need. It's harder to avoid those temptations. So make sure that you are satisfied before you head to the grocery store. Seek out discounts. This plays a lot into plan your trip, right? So are there discounts or rewards? Is there, sometimes there's clearance sections at different grocery stores of things that are getting close to the date that they need to be sold. Also think about using coupons. And my big caveat here is only use coupons if it makes sense. It's really easy to fall into the trap of using a coupon and buying something that you don't need. So a lot of grocery stores have electronic application or electronic coupons. There are some applications like I Bought It where you get money back for food, but just use coupons wisely. Another thing is to look at your unit prices. So when you're there at the shelf and you see those stickers, and you'll see there's that cost. So usually it might be cost per unit or cost per ounce listed right on the ticket. And so it's easy to compare brands and see what you're getting. Again, consider buying in bulk only if it makes sense. Is this something that is on sale and you can stock up on? Maybe you're seeking out bulk bins for some of your grains or some of your higher price like nuts and seeds. But again, only buy what you can use. And that leads to my last point of only buy what you need and you can use, is sometimes we get really excited and we want to buy all the food, but try and rein it in a bit so that you keep it where it's at, where it needs to be. Another thing, and this doesn't necessarily fit perfectly here, but this idea of choosing beverages wisely. So drink water almost always. Water is very hydrating. And low-fat dairy for the nutrition. I would say that things like soda and sugary sweetened drinks, they don't add a lot of nutritional value, and the price can really add up. Maybe it's only 25 cents a can or $1.50, but that all adds up over time. And so if you can focus on drinking water for hydration, that is the way to go. All right, so we've successfully gone to the grocery store. We have our food, and now we're coming home. And so we're thinking about food storage and use. So I put this up here, and I know this is a lot of information, but I wanted to talk about food storage. So if you remember, high cost foods that we don't always get to are fruits and vegetables. And I would say that's the biggest thing that a lot of people say is, oh, I buy these things and they go bad before I can get them. You'll see that there's on this list, and in my resources as well, I link to an Intermountain handout that has all this information. But different fruits and vegetables are preserved and they last longer in different places, whether that's in your refrigerator or on your countertop, or maybe in a cupboard, right? And so just be aware of that and store things in a way that it'll preserve them. And the longer that you have those, then the more likely you are to eat them. And so a couple of things, we have those asterisks, and those asterisks are for foods that give off a lot of ethylene gas. Ethylene gas speeds up the spoilage process. So if anything, you want to make sure you're storing those foods separate from others to preserve the lifespan of the other produce that you have. Keep in mind that labor costs, you're paying for convenience. So the more work you do, the more money you save. So when you're at the grocery store and if you're buying pre-chopped vegetables or pre-made kebabs, you're paying for that labor. And it's walking that balance, because you may say, yeah, okay, I know it's more expensive to buy cubed butternut squash, but if I buy a regular butternut squash, I'm never going to get around to cubing it and it'll probably go bad. So think about that when you're making that decision. But keep in mind that once things are chopped, they're going to spoil more quickly. So especially when it comes to fruits and vegetables, again, if you're buying them pre-chopped, or maybe you bring them home and you chop them up, do so in batches and in amounts that you can get through before they spoil. Speaking of spoil, I want to talk about expiration dates. A lot of our food waste comes from not understanding expiration dates, right? We see best by, sell by, use by, and a lot of times we think, oh, this is federally regulated and I've got to hold to these. But they're actually not. They're not regulated. These are voluntary statements to help consumers determine how fresh a food is. So just because something is extending beyond that date does not mean that it's bad and it's unsafe to eat. So keep that in mind. One of the things, so just so you know, sell by is really just for the store, so for their inventory management. Best by is food at peak flavor and quality, and use by is just the last recommended day a product could be eaten at its peak quality. So keep that in mind. There's a lot of flexibility to these expiration dates. An app I use regularly and I recommend is the USDA Food Keeper app. You can go up and look by category, and it'll give you recommendations of how long something is good, and you can keep it before you need to toss or it goes bad. So before you toss it and a food item is on its way out, I want you to ask yourself, is it still safe to eat or drink? So really, when we're looking at those use by dates, the things you have to be the most concerned about are meat and poultry, because most foods, the bacteria that causes spoilage is going to change the texture, it's going to change the smell. So a lot of times you have that gut instinct of, oh, like this is not good anymore, I shouldn't eat it. So if there is a question that it's not safe to eat or drink, don't do it, toss it, okay? But then I want you to ask, how do I save it? So if it's on its way out, especially fruits and vegetables, right? When things start getting wilty, we think, oh, I don't want to use that. But a lot of times, maybe your spinach is starting to wilt. So this is something you can throw into your freezer, and texture is not as big of a thing, right? Throw it into your freezer, pull it out, add it to a smoothie, or maybe put it in a cooked dish, and that texture doesn't matter as much. So thinking about freezing things, and then also, how do I use it? So can I mix it into something? Can I incorporate? Can I blend it? Maybe I put it in a soup or a smoothie or a sauce. Get creative. What can I do with this food? Okay. So I want to say thank you. It's a lot of information. 30 minutes goes very fast. So I just wanted to say thank you and just encourage you. I hope there's something that you can take from this presentation today that you can say, okay, this is one thing that I can apply, that I can change and work on going forward. So we have this, and then here are my sources. So I've listed the any research articles that I mentioned. And then I have the link to the Iowa State University SpendSmart page and the USDA My Plate meal planning for some of those, and then our Intermountain handout for the fruits and vegetables, keeping those fresh.
Thank you so much, Allie. This has been a ton of great information. I just love that you were able to pack it all in a half hour. I have to say, I'm going to go check out the Iowa State University site. That's where I actually got my doctorate and where I did a lot of my work prior to coming to Boise and just before Intermountain. So excited
awesome.
to have that. And I did a lot of work with extension folks. So I'm interested to see if I know some of the folks that worked on this. So that's a great resource. And I know we're at time. And so if people have to drop off, that's okay. We appreciate you all being here tonight. But if any of you have any questions, we don't really have any in the chat just yet, but feel free to pop something in there real quickly. But one last thing that I wanted to ask, since there weren't any specific questions in there, do you have a website or a place you go or some recommendations for some quick, easy, tasty, healthy recipes?
Yeah, I do. So it really depends on what you're looking at. But I think myplate.gov has some really great recipes. Intermountain, our website, we have some incredible recipes that are really good. And they're not always the healthiest, but I love New York Times Cooking. Those have some really fun outside of the box recipes that are highly rated.
And Dr. Joy just asked what to do with aging greens. And I know you mentioned you can put them in smoothies or some meals. Do you have some other recommendations? And then somebody else asked, how do we find these resources and links to review later? The answer to that is we will be posting all of this probably within a week or so. It will be up on the website that lists all of our different webinar topics.
Was the question about aging greens?
Yes, aging greens.
Right, greens, okay. Yes, so with aging greens, what I recommend doing is, especially when they're starting to wilt, this can be a great thing to incorporate into a cooked dish. So especially if you're doing like a pasta or maybe you're doing a curry, as they're wilting, that's not going to matter as much once you start cooking it. So if you have something like kale, or I mentioned earlier, spinach, or collard greens or mustard greens, if you think about a lot of those things too, you boil them first. And so if you do that cooking process, you won't even notice that they were limp to begin with.
Well, that is awesome. Thank you so much. And I know we're over time. So again, thank you all for joining us. And we will get this recording posted as soon as we can. And we appreciate you all being here and have a wonderful evening.